I make more in a day than you probably make in a month. I don't need a burger flipper explaining mathematics to me. Look, sweetheart, why don't you get someone with an actual education to handle this?
What would you do if someone publicly mocked your intelligence, not knowing you helped design rockets that reached Mars? It was Tuesday afternoon during the lunch rush at Fast Bite Burger on 5th Street. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, mixing with the sizzle of grease on the grill and the constant beeping of registers. The smell of French fries and cleaning solution hung heavy in the air, while a line of impatient customers stretched nearly to the door. But one person wasn't rushing like everyone else. Margaret stood calmly behind Register 3, her graying hair pulled back in a neat ponytail, wearing the standard red polo shirt and black visor. At 62, she moved with quiet precision, each motion deliberate and measured. But what happened next would change everything, and remind everyone that brilliance doesn't wear a uniform. Margaret wasn't what people assumed. 20 years ago, she'd been one of NASA's lead propulsion engineers, calculating trajectories that would carry spacecraft millions of miles through the vacuum of space. She'd worked on the Mars Pathfinder mission, solved problems that stumped teams of PhDs, and held patents on engine designs that were still classified. But life had other plans. When her husband developed early-onset Alzheimer's at 55, Margaret left NASA to care for him full-time. After he passed 3 years ago, she found herself 62, out of touch with rapidly evolving technology and needing income to supplement her modest savings. Fastbite wasn't glamorous, but it paid the bills. She arrived at 6 a.m. sharp every day, learned every menu item, and treated each customer with the same respect she'd once shown to astronauts and mission commanders. Her teenage coworkers called her Grandma Maggie, but they loved how she never panicked during rushes and always helped them with homework during slow periods. Most people saw the visor and polo shirt and made assumptions. They spoke slowly to her, asked if she needed help with complicated orders, or rolled their eyes when she took time to double-check their change. But Margaret understood something they didn't respect wasn't about your title. It was about how you treated people when you thought nobody important was watching. Bradley wasn't new to getting his way. 15 years as a regional sales director for a pharmaceutical company had carved sharp lines around his eyes and built an unshakable confidence in his own superiority. He wore success like expensive cologne, the $300 haircut, the tailored suit, the watch that cost more than most people's monthly rent. Bradley made $180,000 a year, drove a BMW, and lived in a gated community where the HOA fees alone exceeded minimum wage. His philosophy was simple. The world was divided into winners and losers, and your job determined which category you occupied. He'd worked his way up from nothing, which in his mind gave him permission to look down on anyone who hadn't done the same. Fast food workers, retail clerks, service staff, they were all just stepping stones, temporary inconveniences in his important day. Bradley carried himself like he owned every room he entered. His voice was loud enough to command attention, his handshake firm enough to establish dominance. In Bradley's mind, intelligence could be measured by salary, and anyone working minimum wage clearly hadn't been smart enough to do better. It was 12:47 p.m. when Margaret noticed the man in the expensive suit tapping his foot in her line. The lunch rush was in full swing, with 3 deep fryers running, orders backing up, and teenagers scrambling to keep pace. Bradley stood fourth in line, checking his watch every 30 seconds. His jaw was set with irritation, his eyes scanning the restaurant like he was cataloging its failures. When he spotted Margaret, the oldest worker behind the counter, his expression shifted to barely concealed disdain. Finally reaching her register, he didn't look up from his phone. "Yeah, I need the executive combo, but I want to substitute the fries for onion rings, add bacon to the burger, upgrade to large, and I've got a corporate discount 20% off." Margaret smiled politely. "Certainly, sir, let me calculate that for you. The executive combo is $12.99. Onion rings are an extra $1.50, bacon is $2 more, large upgrade is $1.25, and your 20% discount would be." "Just hurry up," Bradley interrupted, finally looking at her. "This isn't rocket science." Margaret's fingers paused for just a moment over the register keys. "Of course, sir, that'll be $14.19 total." Bradley looked up from his phone, his eyes narrowing. "Did you just charge me extra for the upgrade? I said I have a corporate discount." Margaret remained calm. "Yes, sir, I applied the 20% discount to your total order. The base combo is $12.99 plus $4.75 for additions, which comes to $17.74. $20% off brings it to $14.19. That's not how percentages work, Bradley said loudly, drawing attention from other customers. You clearly don't understand basic math. The discount should apply before you add the extras. Margaret blinked slowly. She'd spent decades calculating fuel consumption ratios and orbital mechanics, but she kept her voice steady. Sir, the corporate policy states that discounts apply to the total order amount. Would you like me to break down the math for you? Don't condescend to me, Bradley snapped, his voice carrying across the restaurant. I make more in a day than you probably make in a month. I don't need a burger flipper explaining mathematics to me. The teenage workers at nearby registers had stopped to watch. A few customers pulled out phones. Margaret felt the familiar weight of assumptions and judgment, but something else stirred a memory of presenting calculations to rooms full of skeptical engineers who tried to dismiss her the same way. That's when Bradley crossed the line that couldn't be uncrossed. Look, sweetheart, why don't you get someone with an actual education to handle this? Someone who understands how business works. Margaret felt 20 years of suppressed frustration crystallize into perfect clarity. Sir, I understand math quite well. Are you saying my calculation is incorrect? Bradley laughed, a harsh sound that echoed off the tile walls. Of course it's incorrect. You're trying to rip me off because you think I won't notice. This is exactly why people end up working jobs like this. You never learn to think. The restaurant had gone quiet except for the fryers. Margaret's teenage coworkers stood frozen, torn between defending their beloved Grandma Maggie and avoiding a scene. Customers watched with phones ready, sensing something big was about to happen. Sir, Margaret said, her voice carrying a new authority, would you like me to show you exactly how percentages work? Bradley's face reddened. I have an MBA from Northwestern. I don't need some minimum wage nobody explaining basic concepts I learned in grade school. The moment hung in the air like a challenge. Margaret reached slowly into her pocket. Margaret pulled out her wallet and extracted a worn NASA identification badge, setting it gently on the counter. The hologram caught the fluorescent light, unmistakably authentic. My name is Margaret Chen Rodriguez, she said, her voice carrying the quiet confidence of someone who'd briefed astronauts. I'm a former senior propulsion engineer with NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory. I helped design the engines that took the Mars Pathfinder to another planet. Bradley's mouth fell open. The arrogant mask slipped, revealing something much smaller underneath. That's not possible, he stammered, staring at the ID. You work at. This is a burger place. Margaret reached into her wallet again, producing a worn business card. Dr. Margaret Chen Rodriguez, Senior Aerospace Engineer, NASA JPL. The PhD after her name seemed to glow under the lights. Now, she continued, pulling out her phone, let me show you how percentages actually work. Her fingers flew across the calculator with the same precision she'd once used for spacecraft trajectories. Your total before discount, $17.74. $20% of $17.74 is $3.55. $17.74 minus $3.55 equals $14.19. Exactly what I calculated. The restaurant was dead silent. Someone whispered, "Oh my God." Bradley stared at the credentials, then at Margaret, then back at the credentials. But you're working here. Because life is complicated, Margaret said simply. Because sometimes brilliant people end up in unexpected places. Because intelligence isn't determined by your uniform or your paycheck. The teenage worker next to Margaret, Jessica, 17, studying for her SATs, started laughing. Not meanly, but with pure joy. Grandma Maggie's a rocket scientist. I knew you were smart, but rockets. Other customers began applauding. Someone shouted, "That's what you get for being a jerk." Bradley's face cycled through white, red, and back to white. "Ma'am, I'm sorry I didn't." Bradley fumbled with his wallet, hands shaking. "The order is fine, whatever you calculated." Margaret handed him his receipt with the same professional courtesy she'd shown from the beginning. "Your total is $14.19, sir. Your food will be ready in about 6 minutes." The manager, a young man named David who'd always treated Margaret with respect, appeared from the back office. He'd heard the entire exchange. "Dr. Rodriguez," he said formally, grinning, "is there anything this customer needs assistance with?" Bradley grabbed his receipt and stumbled toward a corner table, pulling out his phone not to film, but to desperately Google the name Margaret Chen Rodriguez. The results that came up made him sink lower in his seat. Patents, research papers, NASA mission credits, articles about her groundbreaking work on spacecraft propulsion systems. 3 days later, a customer's video of the encounter had gone viral. Rocket scientist Margaret trended on social media, with comments pouring in from former NASA colleagues, aerospace engineers, and people sharing their own stories of being underestimated. Bradley's company, after the video was shared thousands of times, quietly announced he'd been placed on administrative leave for sensitivity training. His LinkedIn profile disappeared for 2 weeks. Margaret continued showing up at FastBite at 6 a.m. sharp, but something had shifted. Customers waited specifically for her register. Teenagers from nearby schools came in asking for homework help. A local news station did a feature story, which led to 3 aerospace consulting firms reaching out about contract work. She didn't quit FastBite though. "These kids need someone who believes in them," she told the reporter. "And everyone deserves to be treated with respect, whether they're an astronaut or someone just trying to earn a living." Bradley eventually returned to work, but coworkers had seen the video. He found himself eating lunch alone most days, his confidence shaken. The expensive suit felt less like armor and more like a costume. Margaret framed one comment from the viral video, printed it out, and kept it in her locker. "From a current NASA engineer, thank you for showing the world that brilliance doesn't retire, it just changes uniforms. You're still reaching for the stars, just in a different way." Never judge someone's intelligence by their job title or uniform. The person serving your coffee might have a PhD, the janitor might speak 5 languages, the fast food worker might have helped send humans to space. Intelligence, wisdom, and worth aren't measured by salary or status symbols. They're measured by how you treat people, especially when you think there's nothing to gain from kindness. Margaret's story reminds us that everyone has a story, everyone has value, and everyone deserves respect. The next time you're tempted to judge someone by their uniform, remember, you might be looking at a rocket scientist. What would you have done in Margaret's situation? Have you ever been underestimated because of your job? Share your stories in the comments below, and remember to subscribe for more incredible true stories that prove we should never judge a book by its cover.